In this lesson, we're going to take a look at scene organization. Alright, so we've created several pieces up to this point, and it's always a good idea to go ahead and just intercede here and start talking about scene organization and how we can group and parent and name objects properly. So whenever working in an environment, you're going to have several different pieces, and before you get too carried away with the set dressing and adding all these different pieces and different details, it's a good idea to go ahead and start naming some of your objects properly. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to come up with a naming convention, and there are a couple of guidelines that you need to follow whenever naming objects. Let's go ahead and select our event here. You'll notice that the name is box 002. So imagine if you got an environment and you looked through the list of objects and you were trying to find these event objects. You had several different ones, and all you have are all these box names. It's very non-descriptive. It's hard to figure out what is what, and you're spending a lot of time just sorting through and trying to figuring out what each individual object is. Now, it's also important to name your objects because it's easier to search that way, and there may be times where you can actually apply different effects using code, and finding objects with a specific name makes it a lot easier. So looking at this event, first thing that we want to do is we want to come up with a name that is descriptive. So one thing that we could do is vent, okay, that's descriptive and we understand what it is. And then you could do things like give it a number. So if you're going to create multiples, you can give it a number, you can give it a letter or something like that. But even then, I like to be a little bit more descriptive than just this. So if I'm working on a specific project or environment, I would say something like sci-fi. So sci underscore fi underscore, let's say ceiling vent, and let's make sure that we spell this correctly, ceiling underscore vent, and that's very descriptive. So I know that this goes with my sci-fi scene. It's a ceiling vent, okay, so I know that it's going to belong up here, and I could find that very, very easily. Now, if need be, if we were to create a copy of this, because we have set up a name, it's going to allow us to give it a name itself, but it's going to inherit the initial name that was given. So if we want, we could type in something like underscore, and let's try this again, underscore 01, and then hit OK, and it's going to save that. Now if I copy this, it's going to go ahead and do 002. Okay, so it looks like 3ds Max is going to always give us a prefix or a suffix of 3 numbers here, 3 digits. Okay, but we still understand what that is. All right, so I'm going to hit Control Z here, and then we'll go ahead and we'll come in and we'll select our frame. So here it says plane 001. Again, we have that problem. So what we want to do is we're going to say sci-fi underscore door frame. And you may have multiple types of doors, so you may want to be a little bit more descriptive with the type of door it is, or something like that. Now, if it's not in your scene, you may not have to worry about that so much. Okay, so that's the door frame. And then what I can do is I could even copy, so hit Control C on that name, and I could paste that in. So I have door frame, and I'm going to type in underscore upper underscore door, and Control C, select my object here, and Control V to paste that in, and we'll just replace upper with lower. Okay, we have our rectangle here, so that's not named properly, so we can call this med kit or something like that. So actually let's type in sci underscore fi underscore med kit. Okay, and then we have all of our floors. Okay, so we've got a little bit of organization and hierarchy. We've been introduced to that already a little bit by grouping these objects together. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of those tiles, and I'm going to ungroup those. So if I go to Group, Ungroup, you'll see that these are now all individual objects, and they have terrible names. Now, when it comes down to something like this, this is the problem, okay? You may have a strict guideline on every single object must be named. You may be able to slide every now and then, and it's always a good idea to go ahead and just name it as you build it. Okay, that's always a good guideline, a good workflow. Now, sometimes it may not be as important, so like with the floor, I may not have to have all of those individually named. So what I could do is select all of those objects as a single group. So this is going to be my floor, and I could group them together. And we'll call this psi underscore phi underscore floor, and that's one single object. So anytime that I go looking for this, it's going to come up as a single object and make things a little bit easier. Now, when working with groups, there may be a time where we want to actually access just a single portion of this. So let's say that we want to access a single grate and move that. So what I could do is I could go to Group, Open, and then I could select the objects individually. So I could select this one grate here. I could pull that up and rotate it and put it wherever I want into my scene. Okay, so if I want this to be kind of off of the floor, okay, just kind of sitting up on top there, then I could go ahead and go back to Group, and once I'm finished, I'll close that, and you'll see that it's all back together. Okay, but that individual object is still there. Now, whenever we open a group, one thing that I want you to notice is you get this pink bounding box. If you see that, that lets you know that you have a group that is open, and you'll just have to select a single object of that group, go to Group, and Close. All right, so now we have our door, and we have all these different pieces to it, and let's say that we wanted to group all these together. We want them to be able to move independently, and let's select all of them and group. Okay, so if I group this, I'm going to say sci-fi door assembled. Okay, or you could type in group or something like that, but this is another descriptive name. But the problem with this is, let's say that I want to have this door animated. This is not going to help an animator because they can't select those individual pieces unless they go to Group and then Open and then animate that way, and that's going to pose some issues. So let's let's select an object, let's Group and Close, then we'll go to Group and then Ungroup. So what's a better method for this? Well, what we could do is actually use parenting to give us the independence that we need to be able to move individual objects while still keeping them grouped together. So what we need to do is we need to group children to parents, and the parents is going to be the object we'll move to move the entire object. All right, so in this case, we want independence with our door objects, but then we want the door objects to move with the door frame if this is ever needed to move. So what we can do is we could select the door objects, we'll go to Select and Link, and then we'll just simply hover over our door objects that we have selected. You'll see that we get this icon that looks like a chain that's being put together. And if we click and hold and we drag out, we can hover over our door frame, and when we release, it's going to link to that object. So now if I select the door frame, let's turn that Select and Link off. So let's select our door frame and move it. You'll see that our door objects move together with it. But now, if I move these individual doors, they can move independently, which gives us the exact behavior that we wanted in the first place. So now they are individually named, but they are now parented together. Now, sometimes we want to be able to see our parented objects in a list. It's hard to tell if there are objects that are dependent of one another. So in order to see this, we'll have to bring up our Select by Name. And this is going to bring up all of the objects in our scene in a list. Now in this list, we see that we have groups, and then we have individual objects, but we don't see any parenting information. Well, a way to see that, we can go to Display and then Display Children. So here you can see that we have sci-fi door frame, and we can hit this plus symbol and that will expand out, and that shows us that it has two children, the sci-fi lower door and sci-fi upper door. So here we can select individual objects through this list. Now you'll also notice that we have some groups. So I have sci-fi floor, and then I have sci-fi medkit as a group. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and let's take a look at this box 001, and let's figure out exactly what it is. So let's select it and then hit OK. You can see that it's been selected, and that's our initial layout. Okay, that's our corridor. So let's go ahead and just call this corridor. And I'm not sure if I'm spelling this correctly, but we'll go ahead and go with that. I believe it's 2 R's in there. So we have corridor. All right, so that's a look at how we can manage our scenes. So we've taken a look at how to name them properly, how we can use groups, and then how we can also use parenting to help us in our individual projects. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to start getting into reusing geometry. All right, so we'll do that next.